Hey everyone, and welcome to our channel. Today's video is all about how we cleared overgrown vegetation on our farm tracks with the help of a 15-ton excavator. To provide you with an end-to-end overview of this project, we'll split the video up into 4 parts. First, we'll share with you the steps that we took to ensure that any vegetation cleared was done so legally in accordance with the rules set out by the governing bodies of our local district. In the second part, you'll see some cool footage of the excavator in action, the types of accessories and attachments that it came with, and how it made our roads drivable again. In the third part, you'll see the gravel trucks arrive and also how the material was spread to fully transform our driveways. In the fourth part, we'll share with you a comprehensive breakdown about how much each component of this project cost. And of course, if you'd like to skip past any of the sections, you're welcome to do so using the YouTube chapters seen at the bottom of the video. So get ready to learn all about driveways, how much they cost, and all the fun legal stuff that you'll likely need to familiarise if you're planning on owning rural land in Australia. And just before we jump into it, as a quick disclaimer, do note that this video is made based on our personal experiences and the outcomes that we had, so naturally not all content may be relevant or applicable for you. So let's jump into part 1, the legal and environmental considerations that we took. To set some context for why this is important and why we chose to make this section the very start of today's video, it's because if you've seen any of the most recent nature documentaries or just posts on social media about the environment, you'd be at least somewhat aware of the environmental destruction that human beings are capable of. And in response to this, we've seen some new and positive initiatives such as regenerative farming and conservation policies, all designed to help us learn to work with the land and not against it. And so in this day and age, if you own land, it no longer means that you can do whatever you like on it. Well, at least legally. And so in most cases, purchasable land in Australia is subject to many environmental policies, and it's great that we now have some rules to help protect the environment. But the only thing from our experience about these policies has been that it's not the easiest thing to interpret them and to find specific answers to questions such as, can we clear our farm tracks? Since becoming landowners, Sarah and I have spent hours going down policy rabbit holes trying to determine what we can actually do on our land legally. And we've also been in touch with our local council and other governing bodies of our local district, bugging them with questions, trying to figure out how this whole thing works. And in the end, we got there. We have the approvals to construct our driveways, but let me tell you this, the process wasn't easy, and it really took us a while to figure this stuff out. And that's really why we decided to include all of the legal stuff in today's video, in the hope that if you're in a similar position, that our experience may shed at least some light on the situation for you and help to save you some time and confusion. To begin this section, we'll share with you a really valuable resource that was the starting point for us. Since the very beginning, when we were just looking to buy land. One of the most important things to know about purchasable land in Australia is its zoning. This will determine the kind of activities that are permissible on your land. So let's go ahead and check it out.
And so welcome to the e-planning spatial viewer, which is an awesome resource provided by the New South Wales Government website. So to get started, when you first arrive on this website, you'll be able to search your address and you'll be taken to your specific plot of land on the map. So for confidentiality reasons, I've moved away from our land and I've chosen Lismore because it's a great place to demonstrate some of the interactive features on this map. So for example, if we scroll to the hazard section on the left hand side, we'll be able to see if the surrounding land is subject to bushfires. And we can also see information about the flood planning controls. So here we can see that Lismore is actually subject to flooding in a few areas. And so moving on to the right hand side of the map, we can see some search results that are specific to our land. So as a quick reference, we can see that we've got vegetation category 1 and 2 on our particular land, which this is the most flammable type. And that's something that we had to keep in mind when buying this land, that there'll be some considerations to make if we plan to build a home or just for safety reasons overall. So we can also see some useful details such as how high we can build. We can see the local environment plan because we're under the jurisdiction of Richmond Valley Local Council. We're under the jurisdiction of their environment plan. So probably the most important bit of information on this resource here is the zoning details, which for us is RU1, which stands for primary production. And so this information is very important because if you do end up looking at the local environment plan or the development control plan, this will determine the activities that you can carry out on your land, which in this example, it is agricultural activity that this land is generally zoned for. So here we've got the development control plan, which basically breaks down the kind of development that you can and can't do with or without approval on your land. And so once again, it'll be very important to know the zoning of your land to be able to interpret this document. And finally, if we'd like to generate a property report, we can do so via this button here. And this really helps to speed up the process of looking for land to buy, because previously we had to phone the council or email the council and get these reports generated by the council, which nowadays we can do so ourselves. And so the last thing to mention about this map is that it's a very useful resource to get started, but it doesn't have all of the information for your land. So for example, our land is subject to flooding, but that wasn't shown on this map. This is something that we learned from our real estate agent by speaking to the neighbours and also by speaking to our local council. And the last thing to mention as well is that there are sometimes, when you're looking at land, something called positive covenants, which are legal agreements that apply specifically to your land. So in our instance, we have a positive covenant on our land, and that is that if the roads surrounding our property becomes inundated by floodwaters, the council is not responsible in the immediate sense to provide us with access. And so what that basically means is that if the roads do become flooded, we'll have to wait it out for a few days until the floodwater subside. And interestingly enough, this is actually a normal thing in rural towns, but it's just something to be aware of. And this kind of information you'll likely need to ask your real estate agent about.
And now that we've covered the basics, let's go ahead and check out the streamlined version of the process that we followed to ensure that we can construct our driveways legally. So basically, for us being zoned RU1, primary production, there were two key governing bodies that we needed to consult. These were, number one, the local council. And so the council basically deals with development applications. And as such, they did not require an application for the internal works on our driveways, but they did require an application for the small section of road that connects our driveway to the actual public road to our property. And so what this involved was an application with the council for the apron, as it was called, of the driveway. And it was a pretty straightforward process, but they did require a $1,000 deposit, and that was refunded to us in full because we didn't do any damage to the road, with the exclusion of a $200 fee for one inspection from a council representative to come down and just check to make sure that we didn't do any damage to the road. What this application also required was a copy of our excavation contractor's public liability insurance, which at the time of this video is $20 million. So that's what was required for us to be able to construct our driveways legally. And the second governing body was the local land services. And so the best way to explain this process will be to show you some more resources. So let's go ahead and check it out.
And so in introducing you to the local land services, we'll start with a simple Google search. So what we typed in at the time of conducting our research was Rural Vegetation Clearing Approval New South Wales. So once we click enter, we get these results. So scrolling through to the first relevant result for us, it's through the Environment New South Wales Government website. So if we click on this link, we're taken to the following page. And after reading through just a little bit of the way into the page, we can see that for rural land, clearing of native vegetation is legislated by the Local Land Services Act 2013. However, it's also legislated by the Biodiversity Conservation Act 2016. And so these policies, if you get into them, they do take quite a while to interpret, and they take you to separate acts as well that help to elaborate on the policies. And basically, we found ourselves at the point where we were just 100% confused and not knowing where to go next. So something that we advocate and something that's worked for us is, if unsure, always reach out to these governing bodies, which in our case, the Local Land Services were very happy to help, and they were very prompt in their responses. So this was a really great thing that we did for our research. We also did the same thing with the local council, and so the local council were the ones that also directed us to local land services. And now, in getting in touch with the local land services, they provided us with a really handy resource for interpreting the Local Land Services Act. And this resource is actually the final point of our research journey in figuring out whether we could restore our driveways. And so we'll provide a link to these to all of these resources in the description section of our video. But for the purposes of this case study, we'll go to the allowable activities relating to rural infrastructure fact sheet. So proceeding to this resource, we can see that rural infrastructure in the coastal zone includes the following items, which at the time we were looking for roads and tracks to restore our driveways. And so we knew this was the right resource for us. And when we found this fact sheet, we were also in touch with the local land services just to ensure that we interpreted it the right way. Which if you scroll on through to the maximum clearing distances for rural infrastructure, you can see that the distance for driveways is 15 meters. Now that confused us at first, until we learned to interpret this fact sheet and see that in the case of linear infrastructure, these numbers are the total width of clearing. So the maximum width of driveways for us was 15 meters. And now the thing to keep in mind is that even if you can do your driveways 15 meters wide, local land services will always advise to do so to the minimum extent necessary. And the last thing to be aware of is the vulnerable and sensitive regulated land category, and we can find out if your land has this. So for us, we use the Transitional Native Vegetation Regulatory Map, which we've got Byron here, just to see that in our instance we were looking out for these vulnerable vegetation categories on our land. And so these pink sections and orange sections and maroon sections indicate the endangered or sensitive regulated land. And we found actually some of this pink vegetation category on our land, but towards the back of the block where we weren't planning to do any development. In fact, that's the area we're going to have as conservation land anyway. So based on checking all of these resources, we were confident that we can go on ahead and conduct the restoration works of our driveways. So that just about takes us to the end of this section, so let's go on through to the actual footage of the excavator in action. Welcome to part 2, clearing and leveling the driveways. In this scene, you can see the 15-ton excavator being unloaded from the truck. And if you look closely, you'll see that I'm not actually the driver here. We had Brett from Digwise Earthworks help us out with his job, and Brett was an absolute legend to work with, and he did an awesome job of our driveways, as you'll see in the footage to come. Now, for anyone wondering why we chose to hire the operator and excavator as a package, as opposed to doing the job ourselves and just hiring the machine, there was a few considerations that we made. So number one, safety. I don't have any experience using machines like this, so I would definitely have been a hazard out there pushing over some of the heavy trees that we had to move. Second consideration was efficiency and quality. I would have done the job slower and not to the same standard as an experienced operator. So all that was taken into account when calculating the costs of our project. The third thing is something that people often don't consider, and this is how much fuel these machines use in a day, which can be up to 150 litres, which at the time of making this video is $300 worth of diesel. And the last thing to consider is that if the owner of the excavator knows that I don't have any experience, they wouldn't actually let me borrow the machine. And so in this footage, you can see some of the attachments, or really all of the attachments that this excavator came with. So we've got the two buckets that you can see here. A larger one used for digging wider holes, and a smaller bucket that we used for most of the clearing work. And you can also see this excavator has a thumb-like attachment on it as well, which really helped us out. And on the right hand side you can see the ripper attachment in the big bucket. So there'll be more on that later. And in this scene you can see some of the overgrown vegetation is being removed from a garden bed that we had on our land. And so this garden bed has ended up becoming a lantana bed. And for anyone who's worked with lantana, it's not the best thing to be pulling out on a mass scale like this. And we had a couple of old cabins on the block and also an abandoned school bus, and they were all covered in similar kind of vegetation, which would have just taken us forever to do by hand. So it's awesome to have this machine here to help us out, and it genuinely transformed our driveways. And so in this next scene, we've got Brett helping us out with consolidating some of the scrap metal that we had on the land. And not only was it so much more efficient to have an excavator do this, but it was also a lot safer for us, because under one of the roofing sheets we did find a snake, and it was just good to know that it wasn't one of us pulling it out by hand. And this tree here was leaning dangerously over the driveway, and so we'd made the decision to knock it over. And as you can see from this video, it really didn't take much of a push, so we were happy that we got rid of this one. And so for any trees that were knocked over and snapped above the root, this is how the root was pulled out. And so here Brett was nice enough to clean the dirt off the root, which is just something to consider if you're planning on using these roots for firewood or other purposes. Having them covered in dirt would make it really difficult to process them by hand. Now in this scene we did mention the ripper attachment before, so here you can see the swap over to this attachment, and also a little bit of footage of the ripper in action. And so for this project, the ripper was used to tear the roots on one side of a tree primarily, so that it would be easier to push over with one of the other attachments. And I found this technique to be really good because I could see the trees were still really stable, having only one side of the roots teared out, but it made it so much more easier for the excavator to be able to push them over. And so what you can see here is that pretty much the whole weight of the excavator is used to pull out the root with the ripper attachment. And so this section is the final part of this stage of the process, and here we've got the final leveling of the driveway before we lay the gravel. And this is also how a lot of the rubble and vegetation is moved across the driveways, just using the attachment you can see here. And now taking a quick walk through, we can see some of the progress so far, and on the left hand side you'll see a pile of rubble. And now at first we thought it would be the most efficient way to use the excavator's time, just to push everything to the side and we'll take care of it later, but we came to realize that this wasn't the best decision for us to make, because with the material interlocked like this, it makes it really difficult to process by hand, and it's also stuck with some dirt, which is really difficult if you've got a chainsaw cutting it all up. Welcome to part 3, unloading and spreading the gravel. And so here you can see one of the trucks arriving, and it's got a trailer in the back. And this combination is called the truck and dog trailer. So this is a more efficient way to have gravel delivered, because as opposed to just having the truck by itself, we get double the amount of gravel per delivery or more. And so we found that we had about 33 tons of gravel delivered per load using this combination. And so here you can see some footage of the trailer unloading the gravel. And so a quick shout out to the drivers from Graham's Quarry, because they did an awesome job of delivering our gravel. The deliveries are prompt, and the time that they said it would take between deliveries is exactly how long it took. These guys really put in a good effort to make sure that we had all of the gravel necessary for this project. And from what you can see here, going at a nice steady speed, the gravel was spread really evenly, so this made the next stage of spreading the gravel itself a lot easier for Brett. And also in the background you can see the overgrown tea tree plantation, which these roads are actually being put in place to be able to access this plantation for when we're ready to harvest it. Now moving on to this clip here, this is called the jackknife technique, and this is how you unload the gravel from the truck itself without getting it all over the trailer. And so another thing to mention here is that you won't see a water truck wetting the gravel or any kind of compaction equipment other than the excavator itself, the weight of which was used to compact the gravel in our case. And this was because we had a limited budget and we are off-grid without a water supply at this stage. So it was really good that the gravel could arrive slightly moist from the quarry itself. And so after driving it on it a few times, this is how we actually took care of the compaction. So obviously if you do have the resources to have a water truck and some kind of compaction equipment, that's great, but this was the case for us. And so here we've got the 15-ton excavator spreading the gravel using the grader-like attachment at the front. Brett brought down this mini Bobcat with a grader attachment on the front, and this machine was also doing an awesome job on our site, but the advantage is that it uses a lot less fuel than a heavier machine. And the other cool thing about this grader attachment is that obviously you can set the angle for the to shape the crest of the road and the drains if you're doing so. And so with this attachment we're able to ensure that the tops of the roads have a crest to avoid puddling in the middle of the roads. So here you can see this attachment in action.
And so now we're on to the fourth and final part of today's video, and this is to answer the question of how much did this project cost. Now, keeping in mind this will be a rough estimate only because costs do vary by region, do vary by contractor, do vary by project, and also from quarry to quarry the costs of gravel differ as well. So keeping that in mind, here's what the project cost for us. Now the first cost on the list will be the 15-ton excavator and Bobcat. Now the contractor charged us an average of $160 per hour for these machines, and that includes the machine, the operator and the fuel for these machines to function. Now $160 per day was including GST, and based on the amount of hours we were charged, this amounted to about $1,500 per day. So moving on to how many days we had the excavator on site doing the clearing. This was 4 days spent roughly on actually clearing overgrown vegetation on our block. So this amounts to $6,000. Next, we have 1 day to spread the gravel and to compact the gravel as well. So this gives us a total of 5 days that the excavator was on site working full time. Now this adds another $1,500 to the list. Moving on to the next cost, and also the largest cost, this was the gravel. Now this cost $900 per truck and dog trailer. So a truck and dog trailer has about 33 tons of gravel in it, and we had 14 of these arrive on our land to make about 500 meters of driveway. And so the total cost for this project ended up being an approximate figure of $20,000. Now keeping in mind this was done to the minimum extent necessary, where we could have used a lot more gravel, we could have made a lot more roads, but just to get started with a limited budget, this is what we spent on these driveways. And so if we break these costs down by 100 meters as an approximation for roughly how much this kind of project can cost, per 100 meters of clearing and leveling driveways, we spent about $300. And per 100 meters of gravel, we spent roughly $2,500. Now this was about 92.5 tons per 100 meters of driveway, or the equivalent of about 3 truck and dog trailers. And lastly, spreading and compacting the gravel also amounted to an approximate figure of $300 per 100 meters.
And so here we are, with our driveways complete. We can now get around in our land no matter what the weather is. And if you enjoyed the content in this video, please hit the like button, leave a comment, or subscribe to our channel to see future videos posted by us.